What is up, guys? I'm Kyle at Fortune, and in this video we're finally doing one of the most important upgrades you can do for your Samurai: power steering. Oh. If you've been following this channel for a little while, or if you've seen any other videos of us wheeling the Samurai, then you've definitely seen me struggling on the trail big time. Samurais don't come stock with power steering, at least not in the United States. So a lot of them just had that mechanical steering and people were totally fine with that and wheeled them like that for a long time. For me, I've been wheeling mine like that this entire time.
That's it. I don't have power steering, so that's all I can do.
Oh, okay. Let's start. It's not very good power steering. So
He doesn't have power steering.
Yeah.
Keep turning. Keep turning.
That's all she got.
Okay.
That isn't what I wanted.
And not only has it led to challenges on the trail, it's actually given me a sprained wrist one time when I was going through the Rubicon. I really tore up my wrist just from that steering wheel yanking back and forth. It's put me in a lot of places that I didn't want to be. It's made a lot of obstacles much harder than they needed to be. And it's also just made the trail feel a lot rougher and made the days a lot longer. But those days are finally over. What I did is I decided to pick up the Trail Tough power steering kit. Now, the hot item in the Samurai world right now is the EPS, or electric power steering. You can get those out of a Toyota Prius, a Toyota Corolla, some Nissans, all kinds of different things. And for most people, it looks like it's under $200, which is a heck of a deal. Unfortunately, for anyone planning on running bigger than a 33-inch tire, the electric power steering does have its limit. Power steering does as well if it's ran traditionally, but this Trail Tough kit comes with some extra stuff that can help you run bigger tires, which I'm planning on running a 37 eventually, and maybe even 40s down the road. So we'll see how that goes. That's pretty much the biggest reason why I went with the Trail Tough kit, is that it also comes with a hydraulic cylinder. So not only do you have power steering now, but later on when I swap axles, or if I just decide to run a bigger tire with these current axles, you can put hydraulic assist on there and really have that one finger steering that everybody wants on the trail. Some of the downsides to running a traditional power steering setup, especially on a Samurai, is that you do have to run yet another accessory off of that engine. And when you only have 60 horsepower, there's not a lot to spare for running other accessories, but you know what? That's just one of the small things to this. Another in this case is cost. So this Trail Tough kit is probably one of the best kits out there. It's definitely the best one I've seen. That's why I went with it. It's got a lot of quality PSC parts, and everything's either rebuilt or brand new, and PSC makes some awesome stuff, so I was really happy to go with that. Anyways, this is going to be a little bit of a longer video just because there were so many steps to this install and I did run into some different issues, but I'll try to put some timestamps down in the description so you can skip around if you want. Let's get into it. We're eventually going to need to get this radiator out, so let's just drain it right now. Got the cap off the radiator so it drains a little bit better. Alright, we've got the radiator pulled out. I'm going to put all of my bolts back into the fan shroud where they bolt on so I don't lose them. And now we're going to see how much room we've got to deal with the steering pump. Alright, now with that radiator out, you can see we've got a lot more room in here. Plus we have a new crank pulley that we're going to need to put on. That new pulley is going to go from V-belt to flat belt, and the flat belt's going to run our power steering pump. The reason why we have a new one is, I think, spacing. It just needs to be spaced out a little bit more, but we're going to have to take that off too. Good to have all this room in here. And I think next what we're going to do is put on our steering box adapter plate and get that all bolted up. Alright, there's our adapter plate mounted up. Bolts are nice and countersunk. For these ones going to the frame, I've got the red Loctite, which is really confusing because this one comes in a blue container, but this is the high strength. Sometimes people call it the permanent version. I think on the steering box studs, we'll probably do blue Loctite because that is the one that's more easily removed, but it still will hold everything tight. Red on the frame, blue on the steering box. That's the plan. right, we have the new steering box in. Clearances look perfect. I'm glad we had that plate actually, because it moved it out another 3/8 of an inch away from the body and the frame, so it actually fits better like that. Kind of interesting, the input shaft points away from the steering shaft coming from the Samurai, but that's why there's a U-joint in there, so that shouldn't be a problem. And then down here, everything looks like it fits very nicely. So I'm not really sure what happened, but the bolts just aren't lining up right as far as length goes. So the kit comes with 2 of these, which look like they're for the power steering pump to go on because they're really long. And then it comes with 2 of these really short ones, 2 a little bit bigger ones. So the bigger ones only go in one spot. These are the same size. This is way too short. The install directions from Low Range Off-Road in their kit says you need a 45mm bolt. For me, that's too long. I measured it out using a caliper, and it's basically 37mm. They don't really make an M8 bolt in that length. So what I did is I got a 40. I'm gonna put the nut on all the way, cut it to approximately 37, and then I'm going to try to smooth it out and then back the nut off. If the threads work, I should be able to get it on that way. Power steering pump bracket is on there, and I think what I'm going to do now is take off this grill and see if I can get better access to the crank pulley, because we're going to need to take that off and replace it with the new one from Trail Top. If you look at these side by side, the Trail Tough one is way thicker, so it just looks like it's supposed to line up with this flat belt better. But it's indexed. We'll throw it on just how this one came off. You probably wouldn't think they make one for this, but they do. It's a power steering pulley remover and installer. This kit I just rented from AutoZone. I think it was like 40 bucks to rent it. Then when you return it, you get your 40 bucks back. So pretty cool. They have a specific tool. Specifically says in the directions, you don't want to use a press, use a hammer or anything like that to put the pulley on the power steering pump. It'll break the pump. Got to use one of these. All right, so that's how far I'm going to put it on right now. Then I'm going to throw the flat belt on. I'm just going to make sure that they're in line, because I'm not really sure how far to put down that pulley just yet. The directions show kind of mounted like that, with the smaller one vertical and the bigger one going horizontal. So I'll just mount it like that, but you could mount it like this too, which wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because that'd be going into the engine. So we'll go this way. All right, so I've got the pump moved all the way up. So I'm going to throw the flat belt on. Then I'm going to take the slack out, and that's going to help us get a better idea of how the pulley needs to be lined up. There's actually a little bit of metal showing before the pulley's all the way seated. So I'm going to line that up, tighten it up, and then we'll keep pushing this pulley on until it's nice and straight. So the belt they sent me was the Bando, I think it's this number, 4PK940, and it was way too long. So I just used a piece of wire, wrapped it around the crank pulley and the pump pulley, and took it to AutoZone and said, hey, I need this belt, but in this width of this wire, or this circumference. And they ended up giving me a Duralast, and it's actually this number here. It's 347K4. And that one fits great. I've got plenty of room to tighten it up. So if it gets a little bit loose, I have more room there. And kind of better that it's closer to the engine. I have more room for my hoses that are going to come off here eventually. We're at the part where we need to get the Pitman arm on and ready. And you can see it's quite a bit different from the Samurai stock Pitman arm. And for this one, it's kind of hard to tell when there isn't really a reference. But this one is actually drilled out, and we used a reamer to adapt this one so it could take an FJ80 tie rod end. We got this reamer from Low Range Off-Road. I'll see if I can find a standalone sale of this. When I bought it, it came with a kit for the heist year. But anyways, it reams it out, and one of the things you have to be careful of usually is not going too deep, because if you go too deep in there, you're going to take too much off of the Pitman arm, and then you're also going to have not enough room for your tie rod end end to move around. In this case, it's actually really hard to drill through this. I used a drill press and it took a really long time to get this drilled out to be as deep as it needed to be. And it's hard to tell on here, but it kind of polished the sides of the bit a little bit. So it kind of dulled it out. What I did to make sure I was getting to the correct depth without having to check it out with the tie rod end over and over again, I just put this all the way in there and I got that silver permanent marker and just traced around it. That way when I got to that part on the reamer, I'd know I was deep enough. So what I used this time was an impact driver. All of that power made some really quick work of this, and it just chewed right through this, and we're exactly where we need to be. So now we need to get this thing mounted up, get that steering on, and then make sure everything is nice and straight. Before I forget, this is the reamer on the other end. You can see it's squared off. It's a pretty big shank. It only fits in my drill press, but I ended up using this impact driver, which is pretty heavy duty. This is an 11mm socket at the end. The reamer actually fits in there with a little bit of play. It was enough to just eat right through that Pitman arm. So I made really short work of it. I mean, it only took me a few minutes. You can see those red lines on the steering box. That indicates that they are straight. This is the box at center, and that's what we need. It says on the little tag that was attached to this that this steering box had to be centered to start out with. So we're gonna not move that at all, but we're gonna put the Pitman arm on in such a way that it's also at neutral. And what that is it's parallel with the frame. Even though this Pitman arm is kind of curved a little bit, just imagine it's not bent and draw a straight line between these two holes. That's gonna be center. And when we put it up, we want that line between those two holes to run parallel with the frame right here. So we're gonna get it as close as we can. And if you've ever taken off a Pitman arm, these spline in there get really tight and these can get pretty difficult to remove. So I'm gonna put some anti-seize in there that helps them come off a lot easier. Next, we've got to get this tire right here straight on. So this has got to be center for the Samurai. Nice and straight, looks like it is. And then we're gonna put our tie rod end on the end of our drag link up into the Pitman arm. And if it doesn't fit, we're not gonna move the tires at all. We're gonna make this line up with the Pitman arm. That way the tire stays nice and straight. Our arm, as you can see, is pretty much maxed out. So we're gonna get it as close as we can. And then if it needs to go a little bit longer, we'll undo it. Pitman arm is on. We've got the passenger tire nice and straight. Once we did that, we made sure the driver side was straight, and it wasn't, so I had to tow it in a little bit. Undid the bronze jam nuts right here and just rotated this until it pulled that tire in a little bit, because the drag link goes from the steering box to this side, and then your alignment in the front is basically based off of this tire coming in or out based on your tie rod. So we got this one straight. If you look at the lines on our steering box, kind of hard to see them. Very hard to see them actually with the shiny paint, but you'll also have to take my word for it. The lines line up pretty straight. So the last part of this equation is making sure the steering wheel lines up. There's nothing hooked up right now, so we could steer this as much as we want in any way. So what we're gonna do is make it nice and level. And then once you get it there, pull the key out of the ignition, and then let's see if we can get it to lock. So the splines only go on so many ways, so we're just gonna get it as close as we can, keeping this wheel centered like that. Time to put this steering linkage back in. Some of these kits come with a rag joint eliminator, which is right here. Mine's already on there, so the only thing you might have to do is I heated this up in a previous video and pushed these little plastic stop pieces out so I can move this rod in and out, but still it's difficult to move. So if you need it shorter, you just kind of put this on a piece of wood, hit the other end. You just don't want to damage this end because there are some splines on it. Whatever you have to do to push this in, because this new steering box is longer, so you usually have to take some out of here. I'm gonna see if it'll fit like this, and if not, like I said, we'll just take it out and we'll kind of tap this end in, make it shorter. You can see here I'm pretty close to my mark on here. I'm like maybe 3/16 of an inch away. So I put it in, measured it, and it looks like it's gonna be right. You have to put this side in first because this has the notch cut out on the steering box because there's a bolt that goes through there. This side, the notch all the way around, so it can go in any direction. To get this on now, we're gonna remove these bolts, top and bottom, and then put both these ends on. Match them up as close as we can get to being straight without having the steering wheel move or the steering box. All right, there's the steering linkage put in. See, now it's got a little bit of an angle to it with the new steering box. Everything's lining up pretty nice. Next thing we need to do is figure out where our steering reservoir is gonna go. This one is pretty big. It's gonna need to run vertical, like, geez, it's probably like 8 inches tall. So the only where in here that won't require any type of modification is right here. Well, actually, even that will, because I'll have to cut this part off right here. This is where the jack used to go. This thing feels pretty sturdy, so I think that's what I'm gonna do. I think I'm just gonna cut this piece off right here and right here, and then I'm going to drill some holes through here and mount my steering reservoir right there. So it'd kind of be in between this manifold here, the fender well. Yeah, it's a little close to the exhaust, but we don't have a ton of room left in here. We could probably find a way to mount it up here maybe. Just gonna require a lot of work. This is the easiest way right now. I'm not too worried about that reservoir getting a little warm. We're gonna go for that, see how it works out. And this thing is one of the reasons why I went with this kit. I mean, PSC components that are this nice. I mean, this thing's pretty big. Just seems like quality to me. I like having that peace of mind. Sometimes there's pros and cons in the same thing, like this. The con to this is it's just so dang big. But yeah, we're gonna try to mount it like right there. Be nice and close to the steering pump, the steering box, depending on which way these hoses all get routed. So I really couldn't come up with a good way to mount that reservoir. So what I did is I just made this a flat surface, and then I cut out this piece of 3/16 into a rectangle, and basically we're going to bolt this to the jack mount, and then we're going to bolt the reservoir on right here. So that way we'll have some play front and back, and then it's also extending it out this way a little bit more. And what that helps us with is avoiding these lines, because there's going to be a bunch of lines going between the reservoir, pump, and the box. Now we have the ultimate flexibility, because we'll be able to go back. We have it out a little bit. The reservoir can go up and down as well. Test fit is in, looks pretty good. See, we've got some clearance right there. It's just the right amount to where we can get some hoses in there without them interfering with the pump. We close the hood. It's definitely enough room to come down without contacting anything. We need to screw in our little hose that goes on the top here. Yeah, 3/16, 4 bolts holding this down. Maybe it's a little overkill, but this thing's really sturdy on there. We can also mount something here later on. You know, if we have some additional stuff we need to put there, like maybe a air compressor or something. So this will be something nice to build off of. So I ended up finding a shop in town that was able to put this fitting on for me. You can see this one goes on the outside of the hose and it's crimped on. That's the only way they were able to do it. But that way I had enough fittings to finish this, but this kit was short that fitting, and then this kit was also short a 3/8 fitting that goes down to the box down there. And so I have this one right here, and you can see, yeah, it's crimped on, but it's the same AN type fitting, so it can be used. Kind of a bummer that I had to go get those and delay my install a little bit, but that's all right, we're moving on. If you go to PSC's website, they have some install tips, and one of them is for this reservoir or any reservoir you're using. One of the huge things with the reservoir, it's that it's gravity fed. So you usually want the reservoir to be above wherever your steering pump is, and you don't want any loops or uphill travel or anything like that. And if you look at mine, I've got a big loop. There's no way to really get it down in there with these type of fittings. So I tried moving my steering over here in this gap, and it's just too close to the exhaust it's hitting. Then I tried to put it over here, not enough room because this thing's so tall, it was gonna hit the hood when it came down. In this gap, or maybe this gap, and there just isn't enough room to do it. So for me, I've got to run this loop in there and go up a little bit. So I'm not sure how that's gonna play out. They say you can starve the pump if you have a setup like this, and either way we know the pump is going to have to work a little bit harder to get this fed in there. But there's nothing we can do about that, at least not right now, so we're just going to keep moving on with the install, and we'll see how the pump likes that. Next, we need to install some of our high pressure fittings. You'll see on this hose, this one is for a return line. This one only goes to 300 psi, so this isn't one of those. You'll know you have the right one because it's a lot stiffer hose, and they actually have a steel core in them. You can see on this one, it's 3,400 PSI. So yeah, I had to cut a chunk off of mine so it was the right length. And because these have those steel core in there, you have to use something that can get through that. So I used a hacksaw. Wasn't the cleanest cut. I think PSC recommends that you use cutoff wheel like on an angle grinder or something. But either way, just start off, test it out on just a small piece of the hose. And then that way, if it doesn't work, you'll know to try something else. And if it does work, you can keep going. This side I already have installed. It's actually a two-piece setup for this fitting because it kind of just screws on. This part screws inside the hose. We're going to get one on. The first thing you need to do is get a vise. This one isn't connected to anything right now, so this can be perfect for this. Because they have the steel core inside, it's fine to crank down on it a little bit. You're not going to want to put a ton of pressure on it to collapse it, but a little bit is fine inside the vise. Inside this main fitting, you can see that there are some threads in there. It's actually reverse thread. So I'm starting to screw this on backwards by hand. And then when you look in there, you can kind of see how far the hose is from getting seated up here on this collar. I go as far as I can, and it's just going to get tougher and tougher as you go. All right, so it looks like it's about halfway up there. I'm going to throw it in the vise, leave a little bit of room so I can tighten it on there. Now you got to get the right size socket, and in this case, it's a 7/8. And remember, it's a reverse thread, so we got to go backwards. And every so often, just check in there that it's going in straight and make sure it's not up to the edge just yet. This one's right up to the edge, so now we have to get the other piece of the fitting. For this hose, I'm going to put another 90 degree, and I actually kind of want it to sit like this. I want both of them to go down because this is the high pressure line coming out of the pump. It's going to do this kind of U shape going down to the box. Got a little bit of oil on here to help this process. So this part right here is going to go inside the hose, and then these threads are going to thread into the fitting that we just put on there. So this one is right hand thread. You kind of have to push it in a little bit to get these threads bite on. And as you're doing this and screwing this in, it's going to get harder and harder once again. You want to watch your hose and make sure it's not backing out of there. Starting to get a little resistance. Remember, we don't want to crank on this part right here. We don't want to bend that anymore on accident. So we're going to use this hex part right here. All right, so this one is a 5/8. So this part isn't going to be able to rotate once you get it all the way tightened. Like I said, I want mine to match this. Once it gets close, I've got to make sure I stop in the right spot. You might even have to put another wrench on here. Let's undo this press. We'll see how they line up with each other. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, we'll install this high pressure line from the pump to the box. All right, so now we have our pump feed line and our high pressure line in there. Got the radiator put back in and everything tightened down. No fluid in it yet because I'm going to make sure everything's working before we get any power steering fluid or coolant in. Got to make sure everything's lined up right because I'm sure we're going to run into some snags. But next is our power steering cooler. Now they recommend it is run horizontally or, believe it or not, like this. Their concern is air pockets. You don't want the fluid to run up, get an air pocket, and then go back down. We're just going to run it pointing back towards the steering system. So we're going to run it horizontal pointing to the driver's side. Now there's a bunch of ways to mount these. We're going to go directly to the radiator. Unfortunately, the Samurai radiator is so small, it just doesn't have a lot of surface area to help this thing absorb a bunch of air and stay cool. But not really another way to do this, so I'm just going to mount it as low as possible. When we're done, we'll start measuring for the hoses that are going to go on here. These will just slide on and then have a little clamp that goes on them. For now, we're going to be really careful of the fins on the radiator. They are very flimsy and easily damaged. These ones feel pretty solid. For this being on top of the radiator, we're going to want some little pads on there. These are them right here. And the way I'm going to do this is these go through where I want them. And then when we get them there, we're going to poke the hole through the center of this pad. And then that pad's going to go on like that. Pad will be resting against the radiator. So let's see how that goes. So we're just now getting everything buttoned up, and you can see I've got all of the hoses hooked up to the box now. So Trail Tough ended up sending me out, see if I can get a good shot of it. That fitting right there, that is the low pressure fitting that comes from a stock Sidekick box. I didn't have that fitting because I didn't send a Sidekick box into them, and apparently you can only get that off the box. Low Range sells some too, so I was like, okay, I guess I'll just buy one. They ended up just sending me one. They didn't even tell me. They just went and sourced it. They sent me one because I was asking how to connect that, because I thought I was a fitting short. All the low pressure fittings that you would buy from like eBay or Low Range take the AN style fitting on the end. So I was like, I'm missing a fitting to get that on. And now it makes sense that I didn't have that last one, because the Sidekick one, the tube just slides right over it. You just got to clamp it on there. But anyways, they sent that out. That was really awesome. It just showed up in the mail. And I was like, well, from Trail Tough, what's this? And it was that part I needed. So big thanks to them. They really saved me with that. So I didn't have to spend $15 on this little fitting plus whatever the shipping was going to be to get it out here. So now I'll show you everything I've got hooked up here. I'm going to take this coolant reservoir off. All right, the coolant reservoir is kind of in the way here, and I was trying to just pull it off a second ago. This side. There we go. Okay, so here's the look at what we've got going on. I'm going to try to get you guys a good angle here that we can actually see everything going on. But there is the flat belt on the pump, and you can see the distance we've got from the shroud on the radiator, distance from the radiator bracket right there. That actually pushed bracket out a little bit. I don't know if you can tell. It's sitting like a little bit higher on that side, and that side's also pushed in a little bit more. So it's not perfectly centered in there, but the fan's got plenty of room all around. And I could change that. I could just bend this or maybe notch a little bit out for the box, but I decided to just go with it how it is. Anyways, we've got our power steering reservoir up here. We're getting ready to fill it up with fluid. We're going to go an inch from the top is what the directions say to do on PSC's website. We've got the supply hose. This is the big 7/8 one that is going down and supplying the fluid to the pump. Pump's running off the Trail Tough crank pulley up here to the Trail Tough pump pulley, and then it's pumping all of this high pressure into this hose, which kind of just does a big bend around and then goes in right there. So that's all the power going into the box. This is a 3400 PSI hose. Then back there is that Sidekick fitting. This is the return line that's going down, and then it goes into the bottom of this power steering cooler, flows up to the top, and then it rides these hoses back and finally returns it back into the reservoir. A couple things. One, it's a little bit weird to think about that fluid coming up and then back. It seems like a lot of extra work for the pump, but I guess the reason why they do that is because they don't want any air pockets in there. And if you go top down, good way to get air in there. If you get any air in there, that just wrecks everything in your system. So you definitely don't want that. Lastly, we've got our vent line here in the top of the PSC reservoir. You can just have these vent like normal, but you know, some power steering fluid can come out of there, or they have a couple different power steering vents that are actually, they kind of maintain a pressure in there. So if you're going up hills or getting sideways or something, it actually won't leak out, but it does allow for pressure changes. So those are pretty cool. I'll throw one down in the description if you guys want to check it out. I might get one myself. This coolant reservoir right here, overflow bottle, whatever you want to call it, was the only real thing that was super close. You can see how close it is to that pump pulley. It is pretty close. When you push this, it doesn't really get any closer. It kind of looks like it is, but it doesn't touch. I think we're going to be good there. The vents from both of these just ride down and into the bottom right there. So that's where we're at. So the next step is we need to add some fluid in. We need to really just bleed the whole system out, and there's a very specific way to do that. But before we do that, I'm going to have to load this thing up with coolant again. Then I'm going to have to double check all of the fittings, make sure they're all nice and tight, make sure everything's connected. And then I'm going to try to get the Samurai so it's sitting on two jack stands, or a jack stand and the floor jack closer together so the tires can go left to right. But let's start doing that. All right, so we cycled the steering back and forth, lock to lock 4 times. Now we just checked the fluid. It looks solid, like it doesn't need to be filled up anymore. So the next step is to start the engine. We're just gonna let it idle for 30 seconds and it's just gonna do its own thing. Then we're gonna turn it off. We're gonna open up the reservoir cap. We're gonna see if we need to add any fluid. And if we don't and it's holding steady, then we'll just continue. If not, we'll add a little bit of fluid in there. Then what we need to do, put the cap back on, start it up, except this time we're gonna go full lock left to right. 15 to 20 times, whatever it takes. And then we're just going to check the reservoir again. And if it looks like it dropped again, then we'll add some more fluid. We're just going to keep doing this until all the fluid is inside the system and there's no more air bubbles coming out. All right, we let it idle for a little bit longer than 30 seconds. Let's see how we did on steering fluid in there. It's pretty low, and there are a lot of bubbles in there. Holy smoke, a lot of bubbles. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the steering wheel back and forth a couple times and see if I can get that fluid to stabilize a little bit. There's a lot of air in there. All right, went back and forth a couple times. Going to check the coolant, make sure that is high enough, and we're going to keep repeating this step until everything looks like it's steady, it's not whining or anything. And then when we're ready, start testing the steering out left to right. A good amount more and a lot less bubbles this time, so we're looking a lot better. We'll add some more on. We're going to do this one more time. All right, looks like she's holding solid now. We're at the part where we're going to cycle the steering lock to lock 15 times. I'm going to go nice and slow to make sure we're working all those bubbles out. And then when we're finished, we're going to check the reservoir. If there's any bubbles in there, then we're going to know that there's still some more stuff that needs to be worked out. So we'll do it again. And then we're going to check the reservoir. And if there's still bubbles after letting it sit for like 10 minutes, we're going to do it again. We're just going to keep repeating these steps until all the air is out of the system. Then when we shut the engine off, the reservoir should stay level. Right when we turn it off, there shouldn't be an issue. So as long as we can hit all those check marks, then we'll be good to go. So I'm going to throw on a little time lapse for you guys so you don't have to sit through that tedious process, and we will see what 15 revolutions looks like in fast mode. We just ran the steering back and forth. I actually only did it 10 times because I figured we were going to need to refill or, you know, check for leaks or anything. And I don't know if you saw in the time lapse, I was actually leaking out some coolant. So I got out and I was looking at it and I was like, oh no, did I damage my reservoir? But no, it was this top hose right here. I just didn't tighten it down enough. So that's tight. I got to clean up that coolant that's down there, or I risk killing all the neighborhood cats, and don't want that fiasco again. Just kidding. I never did that. The reservoir actually looks really good. I mean, there's some very small bubbles in there. I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to run it a little bit more just to be safe, set a timer for the 10 minutes, and then I'll come back. And I think after that, it's time to button up the grill and probably take it out for a test drive. What do you say? We'll see if that's a good angle for you guys to watch this really exciting footage of me turning the steering wheel all the way to lock and then all the way to lock. Tune in. You're not going to want to miss this. You guys are all welcome for me including that in the video. Make sure that you give me a thumbs up so I know how much you like watching me turn the steering wheel. Well, I don't see any leaks. Everything looks like it's working as it should. So I think what we're going to do is lower this down. We're going to throw the grill and the screen back on, and then shoot, we should probably take her for a spin. Absorbed by this power steering, so the ride just kind of feels better because you're not feeling it in your hands as much. So this install actually took me about a month to do, just because I only had enough time to work on it when I was finished from work or on the weekends, and I kept running into these little snags that would kind of take up the rest of my day, or it would force me to order something and get it shipped out. Right off the bat, I knew something was missing from my kit because I had a crank pulley in there instead of the power steering pulley. When I called Trail Tough, they said actually it's supposed to come with bolts, so they mailed me out power steering pulley and I was good until I got to the step with those bolts that I had to shorten, which wasn't a huge deal. Those bolts can be kind of hard to find because they are metric and they have a weird thread pitch to them. That wasn't a huge deal either. The last part is if you're like me and you want to do this setup without sending a core into Trail Tough or having one in your shop already, low pressure fitting that I was kind of messing with at the end, you definitely need to have one of those. If not, you're gonna have to buy low pressure fitting from Low Range Off-Road or 4-Wheel Parts or something like that, and that's gonna require you to have an additional 90-degree AN fitting. As far as customer service goes, Trail Tough was awesome. They just kept taking care of me. I kept calling with questions about the kit. Even before I bought it, I sent them a bunch of emails just asking questions to make sure I was gonna have everything I need, and this kit really does come with everything you need and then some. The only thing that it's missing is that low pressure line that you have to source yourself. I briefly talked with Trail Tough about it and they said usually you have to source your own. They don't sell them. Next thing I know, I have a box at my house and Trail Tough mailed one out to me, which was really awesome. I really appreciated that. So do I recommend this kit? I definitely do. These are some really quality parts like I said before, but I really think it's only necessary if you're gonna run big tires. So for me, I'm on 31s right now and it's awesome. I can have power steering. Everything is gonna be great until I get up to the point where I'm about above a 33. Might need to start looking at some hydraulic assist just to help out with moving those things around. I think even 35s would probably be fine with a power steering setup how it is, but when we swap to Toyotas and we start getting those big meats on there, it's definitely going to help when you're jammed up in those rocks to have that hydraulic assist. So if you're running a 33 or below, then I think electric power steering is definitely the way to go because it's so cheap. But like I said, there are some limitations to what you can do with that. So if you only want to do the mod one time, this is a good kit to have. If not, then the EPS is probably for you. There's a bunch of other kits out there too. There's like 3 or 4 different ones from Low Range Off-Road. I don't have any experience with them. I have wheeled with guys that have them and they like them, so I definitely wouldn't rule those out either, because the one thing that holds people back from getting this Trail Tough kit is the price. It is an expensive kit, but like so many things in the off-road world, you really do get what you pay for. Guys, this was a long install. It's the first time I've done something like this on the Samurai. I'm sure I skipped over some things that you guys might want to know, so just put them down in the comments if you do have questions. If it looks like I might have messed something up, definitely let me know. Appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned. We're going to get this thing out on the trail in just a few weeks here, hopefully less, and we'll see how this power steering helps out, how much of a difference it makes, and hopefully it makes my life a lot easier. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.